To follow along with this video session, make sure you're using the latest nightly build of OpenToonz 1.1.1, which can be downloaded at this address. Also, make sure you're using the camera settings shown here in this window, 1280 by 720 dpi. Select the Geometry tool from the Tool panel and use the Ellipse option. Hold down the Alt key and draw a long ellipse in the middle of the screen. In the Level palette, right-click and create a new style with a worm green color like this. Select the Fill tool and fill the ellipse with this color. Select the Control Point Editor tool and click on the ellipse. Then adjust the Bezier handles like this. Click on the first frame of the next available column, and then choose the Ellipse tool again. Zoom in and draw two ellipses, one large and one smaller, and then two smaller ellipses for the pupils of the eye. In the Level palette, create a new style and make it a light beige color to fill the eye with. Then select the black color and fill the pupils of the eye. Next, choose the Brush tool and draw an indication of the mouth. Use the Control Point Editor tool to finish shaping it the way you like. Choose the Selection tool and move the mouth just under the eyes as shown. Click to select the first frame in the first column and then choose the Plastic tool. Select Create Mesh, leaving the edges length around 5 and then apply. Choose Build Skeleton from the options and build a skeleton like this, each time clicking on the root before placing another node. Select the Paint Rigid option, painting the rigid section of the mesh just like this. Next, select the first frame of the column with the eyes. Zoom in on the eye area, select the Plastic tool, and then create a mesh. Zoom into the mesh and increase the mesh density to around 1.2. First, paint all areas of the mesh as rigid. Then switch to the Flex option and decrease the brush size to paint inside the mesh with a flexible color. To correct any mistakes, go back to the Rigid option, painting over the green area. Giving the mesh a rigid outer shell with an inner flexible layer produces a very controllable shape. After this, choose the Build Skeleton option and build a skeleton precisely as I'm showing here. To create a branching area for the skeleton, click first on the node where you want the branch to begin. Now we need to connect the eye level with the worm level. Make a note of node number 1 here, which will connect to node number 7 here. From the Windows menu, choose Schematic, and then enlarge the window like this. Move these out of the way, and then move these here. This is the eye level, and this is the worm level. Connect the input port of the eye level to the output port of the worm level. Then adjust this to node 1 and this to node 7. That's all we'll need to do with the schematic. Zoom the view out, then hide the mesh visibility of these two levels. Select the worm mesh, then the Edit tool, and Center. Move the center point to the tail. Then choose Scale and scale the worm down like this. Select the Position option and then move the worm here. Select the first frame of the eye level, then choose the Plastic tool and zoom in on the eyes. Let's place the eyes where they need to be. Make sure you're in Animate mode first. You'll notice that the large eye is behind the small eye and it should be the other way around. This can be corrected by adjusting the number of the stacking order. Select each of the following nodes and change their stacking order to 1. Select the nodes of the small pupil and change their stacking order to 1 as well. Select each of the nodes of the large pupil and change their stacking order to 2. It looks like we forgot to build a skeleton for the mouth. Choose frame 1 of the eye mesh level, and then choose the Build Skeleton option, and build a skeleton for the mouth. Choose the Animate mode and adjust the mouth. Select frame 1 of the mesh level for the worm, and adjust the worm shape. Select frame 1 of the eye mesh level, and then adjust the mouth like this. Select frame 1 of the worm mesh level and continue adjusting the shape of the worm like this. Don't worry about any undesirable overlapping lines. We'll correct these later using patches. Zoom the view out so that we can see the entire scene. Then, using the Geometry tool with the Line option, draw a line as a ground plane on the first frame of the next available column. To extend the frame range of all of our columns, select the first frame in the first column, dragging right to include the last frame of the last column, then drag the tab downward like this. Stop at frame 97. Select the first frame of the worm mesh column and then select the Plastic tool. We already have a keyframe on frame 1. We'll need to place another one on frame 7 and adjust the worm there. Clicking once on the frame slider, place a yellow dot on frame 1. Click on frame 7 in the worm mesh column and begin to adjust the skeleton to form the arched shape of the worm. Click on frame 1 of the worm drawing level to hide the skeleton, and then drag the frame slider to check your result. We don't want the worm's tail to lift up, so we'll need to place an in-between frame here. Continue adjusting these 3 keyframes until the motion of the worm is smooth. Click and drag from keyframe 1 to keyframe 2 to select them both. Then hold the Shift key on the last keyframe and drag them into this position. There's a little confusion in the order of the keyframes here. Let's correct that. Select keyframe 9 and then press the Delete key to delete it. Select keyframe 13 and delete that as well. To be safe, we'll just copy and paste one keyframe at a time. We do this by clicking on the keyframe and then holding the Shift key and dragging that keyframe down. We have produced a cycle, but the worm is not advancing as he crawls. To cause him to advance, select the Edit tool and, using the Position option, move the entire worm so that his tail matches the position of the tail of the onion skin. When the worm is in the arching position, his head needs to match the head of the onion skin as well. We've ended up making a lot of in-between keyframes to correct for the rising of the tail as he crawls. As we progress, we'll use fewer keyframes. Click on the Frame 7 keyframe and then Shift-drag it into this position on Frame 19. Select Frame 19 and then using the Edit tool, drag the worm into its new position so his head lines up with the head of the onion skin. Click on Frame 17 and add the correction for the rising tail here. Copy and paste Frame 13 by first clicking on it and then holding the Shift key and dragging it to Frame 25. Remember to use the Edit tool to drag the worm into its proper position with the tail aligned with the tail of the onion skin and the head aligned with the head of the onion skin. Add the correctional keyframe on Frame 22. I've gone ahead and repeated this process, advancing the cycle all the way to Frame 97. Click the loop icon in the playback controls to watch your animation in real time. While the worm might crawl this fast when running, we want him to be leisurely walking in this case. Using the frame rate slider, adjust the frames per second to 12. This is the speed that we want. Though the crawling motion is smooth and accurate, he still looks a little lifeless. Let's add some life to this animation by animating his eyes and mouth. Select the first frame in the eye mesh column, select the plastic tool, and zoom in on the eye area of the worm. Let's produce a bulging eye effect as the worm arches to crawl. We'll do this on Frame 7. Reposition these nodes to produce a bulging eyeball and a bulging pupil effect. The result makes him look like he's straining and determined to advance. We can use these two key frames to create this effect throughout the entire animation by copying and pasting alternately each key frame into a successive position. Whenever the worm is flat, we use the neutral eye position. Whenever he's arched, we use the squashed and stretched eye position. I'll complete this task behind the scenes. Right-click and disable the onion skins, and then drag through the animation slowly to check the result. This has produced a lot more life and credibility to the animation, but we can add even more variation. Click on Frame 28 in the Eye Mesh column, and pose the eyes as though he's looking back over his shoulder. By using a more circular eye shape and separating the eyes, we can actually produce a 3D head turn effect. To make this eye position hold, let's copy and paste it and drag it into a new position. Copy and paste these two keyframes by first selecting them, dragging on the first and selecting the second, then holding the Shift key and dragging downward on the second keyframe. Again, copy and paste these new keyframes down to the end of the animation to produce a final eye movement. Zoom the view out so that we can see the entire scene, and then play back the animation to see it in its entirety.